Alyse Nelson, thank you so much for joining us on Foreign Press USA. It is such a pleasure to have you. You are CEO and co-founder of Vital Voices Global Partnership. And, for those that don't know about Vital Voices, it has been around for many years, first as a governmental organization, and then it moved on to the private sector, which is something that is very common here in the United States. But what's not common is for an organization like this to thrive for so long and for it to be so popular. I went on your website and it says Vital Voices right now invests in women who are taking on the greatest challenges.
Yeah.
So I guess, I can start by asking um, for you to tell us about your story a little bit. What inspired you to take on what seems to be a ginormous task and one that's
Well,
been thriving? So,
well, as you said, and thank you so much, Susan. I'm so thrilled to be joining you and your incredible global audience. You know, Vital Voices, in so many ways. I mean, I'm a product of Vital Voices. That's why I believe in it. Grew up in the organization, quite frankly. Been with it for 25 years, and I think that's why I'm such a big believer in the work that we do. So I got involved in the issues of women's empowerment at a very young age. I was always extremely fascinated with women's issues in the United States. In college, I had a minor in women's studies. I took like everything, every class I could find with the woman, the word woman in the title, just really wanting to know and understand. I mean, we have to remember, when I was in college in the, early 1990s, the internet was certainly not what it is today. Google did not exist. So if you wanted to learn about women's issues, you had to go there, right? You had to go to China or to Africa or wherever it may be to learn about the challenges and the opportunities that existed. And so, actually, when I was 21, I was between my junior and senior year of college, I found out about something called the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women. And I know you're there at the United Nations. And, it was going to be the largest gathering of women ever in history. This is 1995. So, again, not a time where we were all connected digitally, virtually. And quite frankly, global women's issues was not really on the agenda. There were certainly women's organizations, but there wasn't that sort of global movement as of yet. I heard about this conference, 55,000 women from all over the globe, activists and leaders, in NGOs and government and business coming together. And I thought, I have to be there. I just have to be there. I saved and borrowed. I mean, I'm 21 years old, college student. I bought the cheapest ticket I could find, 4 stopovers before I finally landed in Beijing at that historic conference. And it really changed the trajectory of my life. I think really at that gathering, I learned about so many issues that were not just mainstream, but not known. The issue of human trafficking, for example, and the concerns around, as countries were shifting towards democracy in the former Soviet Union, the concerns of women actually, losing out in that process. Women, there were big concerns of human trafficking, throughout Eastern Europe. And obviously that had happened around the world in other places, but there were so many challenges I didn't know about that I was really learning about for the first time being there. The powers of microfinance, girls' education. You just couldn't read about it. You couldn't look it up online at that time. And so going there just gave me an incredible education. And on the last day of the conference, I heard Hillary Clinton speak, and she gave that very now famous, historic speech that, quite frankly, nobody wanted her to go and give, but she went anyway. It's an incredible story of strength and perseverance on her part to say, I'm going to go, because what she did, I think, is she really did raise the issues that were being talked about to the world stage, because of course every news outlet covered that very famous speech, and all the things that she said were really echoing the voices of women who were there at that conference. And I think for me, listening to her made me recognize that there is a role for all of us to play, right? I mean, I may not have the power and the voice that she has, but I can use the voice that I do have to raise these concerns, these issues, and to push for change. And that I could go back to my university and rally people up and communicate these issues. And that's what I did. And then I invited someone from the White House to come up, and they said, "You should come and work for us as an unpaid intern." I should say. And the following summer, I moved to Washington, D.C. I started a White House internship working as part of Secretary Clinton's staff as part of something called the President's Interagency Council on Women,
Yeah.
which was really looking at um, how we had signed on to the platform for action at that conference to improve the lives of women in 12 critical areas. And it was really to look at, okay, how do we now make sure we implement that platform that we signed on to and actually do those things in the United States. And then the following year, Madeleine Albright became Secretary of State. I moved over to the State Department, and we started up really the first global office on women's issues, integrating women into foreign policy. And there were a lot of roadblocks. Luckily, we had an incredibly activist ambassador, first lady at the time, who cared very much about these issues, who worked in great partnership, sometimes very much behind the scenes with the late Secretary Albright, to really advance these issues. And it was an incredible time, to be in my, early to mid 20s, first job in my career working for these iconic women who wanted to use their power and their space to create space for other women. And women's issues were at such a different time. We didn't have the research that we have today that
Mhm.
really does prove the point that investing in women is not just the right thing or the fair thing, but actually the smart and strategic thing for any
Mhm.
country to thrive.
Mhm.
And so that's really where Vital Voices was born, first as a US government initiative, as you said, first as a conference. It was supposed to be a one off conference. And then women around the world started calling us and saying, please bring Vital Voices. Initially, just this gathering with a number of follow on programs to our communities and countries, because as women leaders who don't have formal power, but who are indeed leaders in their communities, right? And have
Yeah.
that incredible sort of more personal power and are having an incredible impact. How can we have our voices heard? And Vital Voices was an incredible mechanism. And so a couple years later, we then became a nonprofit to continue the work. We became a nonprofit because so many of those women that we supported actually said, you can't let this end. You've got to
Mhm.
keep this momentum going. Keep this network of leaders. We were probably about 3,000 women that we'd supported around the world at that time. Keep the network going. Today, the network of people we have directly impacted, directly served through our training programs, through our fellowships, grants, and just support in terms of visibility and credibility, is actually 20,000 women across 184 countries. I think the thing that makes Vital Voices very different is that we make very deep investments in leaders who are, as you said, taking on the world's greatest challenges, whether it be the climate crisis, human rights or violence against women, economic inequity, racial justice, really taking on those challenges, bringing new and innovative solutions, and I think leading with heart and passion, collaboration, empowering others, and really leading in this new and different way. There's never a dull day. And we just keep pushing. We keep pushing to do more, to strive for more.
Yeah, intention and integrity really shines through your platform. I was looking at it, and the question that came to mind, which I sort of understand, I completely, actually not sort of, I completely understand as a woman. It's important to support women in all areas of their life, but I want to ask you why it's important to support women in leadership roles around the world. And can you talk about how Vital Voices paves the way in doing so. And you work with women all over the world. What are some of the common threads that you see, perhaps, in terms of challenges in supporting these women around the world
Yeah.
in their leadership roles? I can understand that there might be different cultures, different traditions. I mean, all of these things may play a factor, but there must be a common thread as well.
There are. And in fact, about 10 years ago, I actually wrote a book about exactly this because what we began to see is that across all the differences, cultural differences, socioeconomic differences, country, religion, age, there were these common threads. There were these five commonalities in the way that women were leading change. And one of the things is that these women often that we were supporting, it was so clear to us that they were leaders, right? I mean, they were leading communities, they were having an impact, they were saving lives, they were improving lives. But yet they didn't see themselves as leaders. They looked around in their country and saw that leadership looked like something very different. It looked like maybe a dictator. It looked like someone who was born into the position, who had the corner office, who went to the right schools, right? Who spoke all the right languages. It wasn't someone like them, but yet I think bringing them together and even calling out these commonalities in the way that they were leading, and we talk about it as the Vital Voices leadership model or leadership journey, we began to convince them that they actually are the leaders the world needs. And I think in the last 10 years, we have seen a real shift where I think more and more people are recognizing that empathetic, compassionate, collaborative, empowering leaders who are cause driven is what the world needs. We saw that certainly in this health pandemic, right? Where countries where you didn't have weak leaders, you had leaders who were empathetic. And I think people used to see, oh, if you're empathetic or you're vulnerable, you're not a strong leader, right? And I think that people are beginning to see that's not right. Actually, leaders need to be able to put themselves in someone else's shoes. In fact, it is one of the strongest, boldest things to do. I think people are also recognizing, the ways in which we've always done things aren't the only way. And actually, we need new models. We need innovation to make really breakthrough change. And so, um, I think one of the first things that we've done is really called out these practices, these five core practices. The first is really having a driving force or a sense of mission. And it's about how you can only really change what you know, what you have personally experienced firsthand. And that great leaders, they are called to this from experience, right? It's very personal to them. And because of that, they tend to be extremely authentic, extremely passionate,
Mhm.
and they're there for the long haul, right? And that's certainly what we need. Real sustainable change doesn't happen, in our 24-hour news cycle, sadly. um, and the second piece was really around deep roots in the community, having the ability to be sort of the leader who's, among the group, pushing people up rather than on top of the group, pushing people down, right? That true leaders need to be empowering of their people, need to be empathetic, need to be able to put themselves in someone else's shoes, have that vulnerability. Third, we found that exceptional leaders will find commonalities across differences, that they are very good at bridging those divides. That finding that one little piece where we agree is extremely important to make breakthrough change. Um, and that they're able to put their ego aside to do that. Fourth, we found that a lot of times women leaders will have a bold, crazy idea. And everybody around them is like, that's never been done. It can't be done. Forget it. And, I think what it then takes is that courage to go out and implement that bold idea, right? And a lot of them, because of that, and I'm thinking of a wonderful graffiti artist we've worked with who tackled domestic violence and violence against women in Brazil, in the favelas of Rio first. Now her model's gone all over the world. When I first met her, she said, "No, no, I'm just a girl painting in the street because, I'm upset about this and people don't know." And I said, "But you're transforming culture because art has a different way. People interact with art in a different way than they would a speech by a politician or a newspaper article, right?" So, just the idea that like you don't have to fit the mold to lead change. And in fact, the people who are daring to think outside the box are the very people who are going to be able to solve those seemingly intractable challenges. And then the last practice, as we talk about it, is really the resolve to pay it forward. The fact that, leadership, opportunity, impact, it can't stop with you. It needs to be spread, be shared. Just the idea that, the only meaningful measure of power is the extent of its positive impact on the world. Um, and so these are the lessons that we learned. These are the lessons that we then share. And I think it's powerful because women begin to self identify by seeing it in other women, by learning the stories, by seeing some of the data that proves this, right? We didn't have that initially, but today we really do. Um, and I think it's been fascinating to see that, women do lead differently. And actually, that difference is precisely what our world needs today.
We can't not talk about what's happening right now with women and girls in Ukraine. Your organization, Vital Voices, had been working with chapters in Ukraine even before Russia's invasion. I mean, you've had
Yeah.
chapters there in Poland and Ukraine and a lot of Eastern European countries and
Yeah,
European
for the
countries.
last 25 years, we've been working with women in Ukraine and the region. So we have very, very deep networks. Yeah.
Right. And so as we watch the devastation unfolding, and we watch this new group of displaced women and girls, and you being in contact with the women and girls on the front line, and even the leaders that are leading grassroots organizations, helping those that are displaced and refugees. What are they telling you, and what is it that we need to know that we don't know? Because a lot of our audience are journalists, a lot of them
Mhm.
are those that share information. And I know that you had a very interesting piece about what many want us to know that perhaps we miss sometimes. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, right after that, in those last days of February, we pulled together our network, from throughout not just Ukraine, but also Moldova, Hungary, Poland, and and really sat down and talked about, okay, obviously virtually, you know, what is happening, how can we be supportive, but also how can the network support each other.
Yeah.
And we then sent a team from Vital Voices of two as part of our crisis response initiative to assess the situation and look at how can Vital Voices play a role in helping. And of course, I think the instinct for so many is, send food, send clothing, warm coats. But, at the border, one of the things that you'll find is a lot of coats just sitting there, right?
Right.
There's, sort of that real need actually for cash support. There is a lot of support at the borders, at least right now. I'm sure some of that support will wane, in the coming months. But I think what we are finding, we're in communication with a number of small NGO leaders across Ukraine who are still there, many of them who are actually serving the internally displaced populations of women and children. They're women who maybe ran a domestic violence shelter that are now opening their doors for women and children in need in a different way, obviously. And rather than serving, 100, they're serving thousands.
Yeah.
They are not getting any support.
Wow.
So what we are actually doing is trying to funnel financial support directly to them. There is a lot of support, as I say, at the borders, at least right now. There can always be more, but there is a desperate need to support those small NGOs who maybe don't have the big connections to the big foundations, don't have huge fundraising teams, or just every day doing the work to keep people alive and safe. They're serving as clearinghouses to help people figure out safe routes to travel, to warn women of human trafficking. We have seen that there is, a spike in concerns about human trafficking, some cases reported. Um, Also, rape is a weapon of war. We knew we would see this, and sure enough, we're beginning to see cases of rape as a weapon of war. Um, and I think that it, although it's incredibly important to think about this throughout the region, and obviously we are concerned with the loss of life, but I think we also have to think about that displaced community within Ukraine that desperately needs help. And those networks of small organizations, we're supporting
Yeah.
about 5 or 6 of them that we're just getting that direct assistance to. We're also working with wonderful law firm Aiken Gump, who's offered up, pro bono legal counsel. We are also supporting a project to document what's happening and have women tell their stories, and really to document what's happening, and the beyond what you might see on the evening news, just those individual stories, of women and children, and all of that is being lost, and quite frankly, the trauma. There is immense trauma. Just one story. One of the women leaders we work with, who lives just right outside Kiev, basically said that she took her children to Poland and left them with family, went back into Ukraine with her husband, decided she was going to stay there. And at one point I said to her, is there anything that we can do to help you get out? What can we do? Because I am worried about you staying there. And she said, I think it's safer for me to stay here than to leave. But her children just stopped calling, and she started to get really worried about how they were doing, and it was getting more and more dangerous to stay, and so she decided to make the trip to leave, and she did
Mm.
leave. And when she reunited with her children, they said they were afraid to call because they assumed she was dead, and they didn't want to know that both of their parents were dead. So, you just, I mean, just everyone has a little story like that, right?
Yeah.
She's in so many ways one of the lucky ones, right? She got her children out. She has family in another country. She's now out. I mean, obviously her husband is not. He, is staying there, and part of that resistance. But I think I just think about all the stories that we don't know,
Yeah.
um, as well.
Why do you think the road for the fight for women's leadership and equality has been so long and hard, in your opinion?
Hmm, that's a really good question. Ooh, um, I think we've made great progress when we think about legal reform, right? We have a lot more laws today on the books. We have a lot more allies. We have a lot more awareness. We have great data that says that, you invest in women, you indeed are going to improve your society, your economy, the world, right? um, the McKinsey has an incredible report talking about, $28 trillion could be added to global GDP if we could just in the next 5 years get women up to the same level as men in terms of economic opportunity, education, security, etc. Um, I think that a lot of what holds us back is more cultural, more behavioral.
Yeah.
And those kind of norms take a longer time to unravel. And I think even as women move forward into leadership positions, you also have backlash of fear of people thinking, okay, if one group gains power, another group loses power. And I think that's why it's so important to communicate that this is not a win-lose, but a win-win, right? Investing in women is a win-win. It's going to help everyone. It's not about I take your power, right? So I think that we need to engage more men. We need to educate and bring more young men and boys into this work. I think that's really important. We need to use the data and the research to get companies and countries to invest more in this beyond just lip service. And I see that starting to happen, but it happens to kind of check the box rather than that cultural mindset shift, right? So it happens because there's a law, it happens because diversity is good, check the box, we need to do this to be good corporate citizens. I think that is starting to change where people begin to see how it benefits them. And in order to change something, that is what you have to do. People have to see how
Yeah.
if one group, is left behind, it is not going to make my life better. It's going to make my life worse. Or if one, if we can all move forward, it makes things better. I also think there is not enough money. There is not enough investment. Um, Women and women's causes get a fraction. It's like 6% of development dollars,
Yeah.
and a tiny portion when it comes to climate change. How much is being invested in, whether it be women, innovators who are creating, ways to mitigate climate change, or activists on the front lines, be it throughout the United States, in indigenous communities. So I think it's the cultural piece, and I think what will follow is the money piece, right? And just
Mhm.
really investing in this, and investing in organizations. And we've decided that we need to grow. We need to be able to serve a lot more women. We need to get our voice and our message out. And what we have done, part of our strategy, we actually acquired a building. I mean, it's a good strategic financial thing to do. It gives us an asset for the future, it gives us that permanence, but it also gives us visibility. And it gives us a place, a physical, visible place, to bring women leaders and their allies together to really tackle those world's greatest challenges.
And
The
that's in Washington, D.C., right?
in Washington, D.C., on 16th Street. It's about 6 blocks up from the White House. We are opening in 4 weeks from today. So it's really exciting. May 5th is the day we will open those doors. It's very exciting. Honestly, it has been a project that I've been working on for 5 years, raising the money, doing the renovation of a historic property, which is not an easy feat. Uh, but it will always be a place where we can shine the spotlight on extraordinary women from around the world.